at Property Tribes, me personally, I'm a very big advocate of mitigating risk, particularly for newbies coming into the marketplace, somebody that's thinking of buying their first investment property. And joining me to discuss that is Russell Gould, CEO of Vesta, the platform where you can buy and sell tenanted properties and portfolios. And Russell, for newbies starting out, I think one of the lowest risk ways that they can get started is to buy a property that's already tenanted.
You're exactly right. The great thing about buying a property that's tenanted, if you can see the tenancy history, is you know exactly what you're going to get. You know what the yield is, you know how good the tenant is because you can see the history of whether they've been paying or not. And the other thing that Vesta introduces is we undertake a home buyers report, which allows the potential buyer to have a full understanding of the property and exactly what they're getting and what the value of that property is.
Well, this is all what we call due diligence, and due diligence is absolutely vital. Of course, the other thing is that you are going to be earning income from day one, and that's a massive thing to consider, because even if you had a void for maybe 2 or 3 months to find a tenant, then that's really going to eat into your bottom line.
Yeah, you're exactly right. One of the difficulties that new landlords have is that they might find what they think is the perfect property, but they then have to find tenants, and they have to find tenants for the rental yield that they need on that property. And they may not always get it depending on what's happening in the market. The great thing about buying through Vesta is it's ready-made. You have a tenant in place, you know what they're paying, you don't need to go and find one, and from the day the transaction completes, you have a paying tenant, so you start earning from day one, which we think is great for the landlord, great for the buyer, great for the seller, and great for the tenant because they get to stay in the property.
Indeed, and one of the things that we're very keen on at Property Tribes as well, I mentioned due diligence, but researching an area, it is so important to find the demand before you go around creating a supply. And again, buying a tenanted property, you know the demand because the tenant's in there.
Yeah, again, exactly right. You can see any of the voids. You can see how long it took to get a new tenant in place, because we will often have multiple listings of properties in the same area. You can get a feel for what that property looks like, that type of property, the demand for that type of property. And one of the things that we hope to bring onto the platform in due course is more information around the demand for rented property, the value increase of rented property, and other things that are happening in the area that might drive more potential tenants.
I like looking at Vesta because you've got a little yield indicator on the snapshots of the individual properties. And again, to me, when you're a newbie researching, you might be looking at rental comparables. You might not even know to do that, but I hope you do. You might be speaking to local lettings agents about what they think a property can achieve. But, one agent might say 1,200 a month, one agent might say 1,400 a month, and then in reality, when you put it on to let, you end up getting £1,100 a month rent for it. And, the figures, they're so important because even £100 different rent can vastly affect your outcome.
Yeah, the one thing to always remember when you're buying a property from an estate agent, they're incentivized to sell that property. And whilst I'm not saying they will mislead you, they will be optimistic in what they present to you. The good thing about what we're doing on Vesta is, as you've said, you know exactly what you're getting. It's a tenant in place, it's a rental agreement in place, it's tenant history that you can have a look at. And from day one, you know the yield will be what we've presented because you're buying the property with that tenant in situ.
I think the other good thing is, again, that there's not going to be any capital outlay in respect of getting the property ready to rent because there's already a tenant in there. You don't have to go through the referencing, you don't have to do any of all of the stuff that is around setting up a tenancy. And not only does that save money, it saves time and hassle as well, doesn't it?
For sure. Anyone who's bought a new property, a vacant property, will know that you have to do a lot of work for it to get it ready to market to tenants. The great thing about buying a property with a tenant in place is they like it the way it is. In fact, they may not want you to do anything to it. They prefer you not to. And in some cases, they might say to you, would you mind if I put a bit of paint in here to make it look nicer? And you will get more of that behaviour when the tenant is more likely to stay in the property than not. And that's what you get when you're buying or selling through Vesta.
And also, I think, just to finish really, Russell, some landlords come into quite a large sum of money. It could be through an inheritance, selling a business, something of that ilk, and they want to get started very quickly. And you know, again, to minimise risk, they could possibly look at buying a tenanted portfolio, and that almost is like taking a portfolio off the shelf, isn't it?
Yes. So on Vesta, we list single units, we list blocks, so apartment blocks, and we list portfolios, all parts of portfolios. Now, the great thing for a buyer who is fortunate enough to have that kind of capital is they can come and they can pick and choose. They can buy a ready-made portfolio if that suits them, or they can put together a bunch of units or a bunch of blocks or a mixture. You know, if they've got a really good windfall, they can have a portfolio, some units and some blocks, and put it all together in one basket and effectively be a portfolio owner very, very quickly. Prior to Vesta existing, it used to be very difficult and take a long time, you know, a number of years to build that kind of portfolio, with a lot of risk and a lot of problems along the way.
Well, thank you so much for joining me again for this interview, and do go and have a look at vestaproperty.com. I do want to reiterate that perhaps one of the safest ways of getting started if you are a newbie is to buy a tenanted property, for the reasons that we've said, because you know really exactly what you're getting, don't you? And also it's nice to be able to start forming that relationship with the tenant during the buying process that you can carry through to ownership.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The good thing about Vesta is you can buy straight off the platform without even visiting the property, because we have everything there, or you can go and visit the property and look around and meet the tenant. It's up to you.
Fantastic. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this interview, and if you've got any questions about buying a tenanted property, please do drop them on the thread, and be very interested to hear your views, if you've actually done that, how the process was, and how you've got on long term with the tenant that you inherited from the previous seller. Very interesting times ahead for the private rented sector, lots of technology coming in to help us make better buying decisions.